Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes.
Great to be here.
Today we're embarking on a deep dive into modern China. Continuity and Change, 1644 to the Present, by Bruce A. Elleman and S.C.M. Paine.
Yeah, it's quite a comprehensive look, isn't it? Covers a huge sweep of history.
Absolutely. It starts with the Qing dynasty way back in 1644 and takes us right up to 2018 when Xi Jinping's term limits were removed.
And it's really written with a Western audience in mind, trying to bridge some of those, cultural gaps in understanding China's past.
Exactly. It's not just a list of events.
No, definitely not. What struck me is how it tries to get at the deeper currents, the enduring aspects of Chinese culture and society that shaped everything.
Yeah, those recurring patterns. And the authors flag some key themes right at the start, themes you see popping up again and again.
Like the role of warfare.
Oh, definitely. The book really emphasizes how transformative and often, frankly, tragic warfare has been in modern Chinese history.
It's almost a constant presence, isn't it?
It feels that way. And then there's the sort of cyclical view of history that's often discussed in the Chinese context.
Right. Things like Sinocentrism, China as the center, and the whole dynastic cycle idea, rise and fall.
The mandate of heaven, and this focus on the past to fate, looking back for knowledge, and those very particular social networks, the guangxi.
That guangxi concept is fascinating, how it shapes everything from business to politics. It's about those specific relationships, not universal rules, which is quite different from, say, a Western ideal.
It really is. And that ties into another big theme, the different worldviews. How traditional China approached knowledge, often looking back at historical texts.
Compared to the Western emphasis on empirical observation, finding new laws, looking towards an unknown future, it's a fundamental difference.
And that difference really played out when China encountered the West.
Absolutely. The impact of Western powers, the challenges to China's sovereignty, that's a huge part of the story from the 19th century onwards.
And it wasn't just external pressure. You had massive internal rebellions, too.
Like the Taiping Rebellion. Just devastating, but also transformative in its own way.
Yeah, leading to shifts in power, and then the attempts to modernize, the self-strengthening movement, and eventually the Qing dynasty just couldn't hold on.
Its collapse leads into that really turbulent Republican period.
Chaos, warlords.
Then the rise of communism, Mao, Deng Xiaoping, completely different kinds of transformation.
And we can't forget Taiwan's story either, its separate path.
Right, and its complex relationship with the mainland.
Which brings us sort of up to the present with China's resurgence. So our mission today really is to unpack these forces, the conflict, the cycles, the culture, the outside pressures, to give you a clearer path through this incredibly complex history.
Kind of a shortcut to understanding the forces that made modern China what it is today.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. The Qing dynasty, 1644. How did the Manchus pull it off?
Well, it's quite something. A relatively small group conquering and ruling the huge Han population. A key part of their strategy, as the book points out, was adopting Confucian governance.
Smart move. Appealing to the existing elite, the scholar officials.
Exactly. But at the same time, they maintained their Manchu identity. Think the hairstyle, the clothing, clear signs of who was in charge.
So it was about projecting legitimacy while keeping control, and the early emperors were crucial, weren't they? Kangxi.
Oh, definitely. Kangxi really consolidated power. He dealt with Ming loyalists, put down major rebellions like Wusongwi's, a long and very significant reign.
And Yongjing after him, more centralization.
Yeah, the Grand Council, for instance, that was Yongsheng. It concentrated power right at the top, streamlining things, making the emperor's authority more direct.
And then Qianlong, the peak of Qing expansion.
Territorial peak, certainly. Subjugating the Zungars, the Tarim Basin, what's now Xinjiang.
And the book mentions a shift in how they govern these areas.
Right. Instead of just tributary relationships, they moved toward direct administration. More control, but also more expensive, more manpower needed. It was a trade-off.
Throughout all this, the imperial exam system was vital, wasn't it?
Absolutely central, not just for staffing the bureaucracy, but for embedding Confucian ideology. It provided a path for social mobility, sure, but it also reinforced the whole hierarchy.
Based on mastering those Confucian classics.
Years of study. It created a shared culture among the elite, kind of ideological glue holding the empire together.
And the economy in the early Qing, the book suggests it was doing pretty well.
Yeah, there was significant growth. Trade flourished, both internally along canals and rivers, and externally. Specialized production centers emerged. Ceramics here, textiles there.
Genki porcelain, Yangtze Delta textiles.
Exactly. And you even see development in financial tools, wider use of silver, early forms of credit. It was quite dynamic.
What about the social structure? Hierarchy was key, right?
Very much so. Scholars, peasants, artisans, merchants, that traditional order. But the book notes it wasn't totally rigid. Education, passing the exams, that was the main way up.
And the emperor was like the ultimate father figure.
Sort of the patriarch of the whole nation, responsible for harmony. Literacy and education were highly prized.
And governing such a diverse empire, Manchus, Han, Mongols, Tibetans, Uyghurs, how did they manage?
Pragmatically. The book shows they used different approaches in different places. Shamanism for some, Confucianism for others, patronizing Tibetan Buddhism where it held sway.
Tailoring the approach?
Yeah, one size wouldn't fit all. And underpinning a lot of it were those core cultural values, ancestor worship, filial piety. That gave a sense of continuity.
So, early king, consolidation, expansion, relative prosperity. But then things started to fray, didn't they? The later Qing period faced huge challenges.
It really did. And a big part of it was this collision course between China's traditional worldview and the rising power of the West.
That clash of perspectives we mentioned earlier, cyclical history versus linear progress.
Exactly. The Chinese focus on learning from the past, fate, established knowledge, versus the Western drive for empirical discovery, new laws shaping the future. It made responding to new kinds of threats really difficult.
And those threats came increasingly from the sea, right? Portugal, Spain, the Dutch, Britain, and Russia from the north.
Yeah, the interactions became more frequent and more contentious. It wasn't just about trade. It was clashes over laws, religion, diplomacy, totally different systems bumping up against each other.
The early encounters, like the Portuguese in Guangzhou or the Treaty of Nerchinsk with Russia, were sort of precursors.
Yes, but by the 19th century, Western pressure, fueled by the Industrial Revolution, just ramped up dramatically.
The book also talks about corruption in the Qing system, suggesting it wasn't always seen as, well, corruption in the modern sense, more like a systemic feature.
Well, low official salaries meant officials often relied on surcharges, customary fees, just to run their offices and make a living. It was baked into the system to some extent.
But presumably it got worse under pressure.
Oh, definitely. As the state faced more crises, this system became more burdensome and fed into popular discontent.
Which leads us straight into the Opium War. The book makes it clear the silver drain was the key issue for the king, more than the drug itself.
That was the immediate economic crisis, yes. Massive amounts of silver flowing out to pay for opium caused deflation, hurt the peasants who paid taxes in copper but owed them in silver, and ultimately threatened the dynasty's stability. It hit the mandate of heaven where it hurt.
And the war itself, a total disaster for the king.
A watershed moment. The Treaty of Nanjing, ceding Hong Kong, opening treaty ports, extraterritoriality for foreigners. It was the start of the unequal treaties and a major blow to Qing sovereignty.
And things didn't get easier internally either. The Taiping Rebellion.
Huge. Controlled the vital Yangtze Valley for years. Immense bloodshed. Economic disruption.
Its suppression had unintended consequences.
Yes, the rise of those hand-led regional armies, like the Shang and Huai armies, they saved the king in the short term, but their growing power shifted the balance away from the Manchu center, setting the stage for later warlordism.
Then came the Second Opium War, the Era War, more concessions.
More treaties forced on China by Britain and France. And Russia used the opportunity to grab huge territories in the north and west through the Treaty of Beijing. The king were just losing ground on all sides.
Plus the Muslim rebellions in Yunnan and the northwest.
Brutal conflicts, adding to the internal chaos and weakening the state even further. Ethnic tensions flared up.
So in response, you get this self-strengthening movement, trying to modernize, but
Limited.
limited, yeah. The idea was mainly to adopt Western military tech ships, guns to defend China, but there was huge resistance to changing the core Confucian system, the values, the institutions.
Technology without the underlying political or social change.
Pretty much. It was this debate. How much Western form could you adopt without sacrificing Chinese essence? Ultimately, it wasn't enough.
And the First Sino-Japanese War really proved that, didn't it? 1894.
A devastating defeat. Japan, which had modernized more thoroughly, crushed China. China lost Taiwan, faced huge indemnities, and then the Western powers swooped in for the scramble for concessions.
Carving up spheres of influence. It exposed the king's weakness completely. The old barbarian management strategies were useless.
And the Boxer Uprising around 1900, a last gasp of resistance.
Fueled by anti-foreign anger, yeah. But attacking the foreign legations in Beijing brought massive international intervention.
Another defeat, another huge indemnity.
It just hammered the final nails into the Qing coffin, really.
Mhm.
Further weakened the dynasty, increased foreign control.
So by 1911, the revolution almost felt inevitable.
The disillusionment was widespread. The book emphasizes how little support the Manchus had left, especially among the Han majority. The mandate of heaven was well and truly lost.
And the republic is born, but under Yuan Shikai, not exactly smooth sailing.
Not at all. Yuan had his own ambitions, tried to become emperor himself. His death in 1916 just opened the door to the warlord era.
China fragmented, constant fighting.
Total chaos. Devastating for ordinary people, for the economy. Sun Yat-sen and the nationalists in the South were trying to reunify the country, but it was a mess.
And in the midst of this, the May 4th movement happens, 1919. Why was that so important?
It was sparked by anger over the Versailles Treaty, giving German concessions in China to Japan. It exploded into this huge wave of nationalism, but also intense intellectual debate.
Questioning tradition, looking for new ideas.
Exactly. Confucianism came under fire. People started looking seriously at other ideologies, including Marxism. It's really the birthplace of the Chinese Communist Party.
Okay, moving into the nationalist era, the Nanjing decade under Chiang Kai-shek. Some reunification, some modernization efforts.
Nominal reunification, maybe. Chiang made progress, tried to build the state, develop the economy.
But it was always fragile. He was fighting communists, dealing with warlords, and then Japan invaded Manchuria in 31.
So constantly juggling internal and external threats.
And Chiang often prioritized fighting the communists over confronting Japan, at least initially. That was a controversial choice.
Which led eventually to the full-scale Second Sino-Japanese War, starting in 1937.
A period of absolute horror for China. Massive Japanese occupation, puppet governments, brutal warfare. Both nationalists and communists fought, but the cost was unbelievable. The book mentions the Yellow River dikes being broken.
By the nationalists, yes. A desperate attempt to stop the Japanese advance. But it caused a catastrophic flood, killing hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians. Just unimaginable suffering.
So World War II ends, Japan is defeated, but peace doesn't come to China.
Nope. The nationalist-communist alliance falls apart almost immediately. Civil war resumes, 1945 to 49.
And the communists win this time. Why?
The book points to several factors. Nationalist corruption was rampant. Their resistance to real land reform alienated the peasants. The communists, meanwhile, were effective with land redistribution, gained popular support, and had strong military leadership.
Soviet help played a role too.
It was complex. They helped both sides at times, but their support, especially capturing Japanese arms in Manchuria and giving them to the communists, was significant.
And so October 1st, 1949, Mao declares the People's Republic of China.
Reunifying the mainland, finally. But the nationalists flee to Taiwan, setting up the whole two China situation that persists today.
What were the first things the CCP did?
Consolidation of power was key. Land reform, often violent, nationalizing industry. Political campaigns like the Three Antis campaign to root out opposition and corruption.
And the alliance with the Soviets.
Initially strong, but it frayed over time. Ideological disputes, Mao's Great Leap Forward, disagreements over Taiwan, and the nuclear program, leading to the Sino-Soviet split.
China also got involved in the Korean War pretty quickly.
Yeah, mainly to prevent a hostile U.S.-aligned power right on their border. It was costly, but it did help consolidate CCP rule domestically.
Then we get into the really radical Mao years, the Great Leap Forward.
An attempt at rapid catch-up industrialization and collectivization. But the planning was disastrous, leading to the worst famine in human history. Millions died.
Just catastrophic. And after that setback, the Cultural Revolution.
Launched by Mao, partly to regain absolute authority, partly to purge rivals, partly to rekindle revolutionary spirit. But it descended into chaos.
Red Guards, attacks on tradition, intellectuals persecuted.
Exactly. Intense political struggle, the cult of Mao, the Little Red Book. It scarred Chinese society deeply.
Mao dies in 76. Deng Xiaoping eventually takes over. Big shift, right?
Huge shift. Pragmatism over ideology. The focus became economic development.
How did he do it?
Gradually dismantling Mao's communes, allowing household farming, setting up special economic zones like Shenzhen to attract foreign investment, opening up to the world. Export-led growth.
But politically, still tight control.
Oh, yes. Economic reform, yes. Political reform, much less so. Relations with the West improved dramatically, though Nixon's visit had already happened, but Deng really built on that.
And Taiwan during this time.
booming economically.
Yeah.
And crucially, moving towards democracy, which was a stark contrast to the mainland.
Mainland China saw incredible growth under Deng's reforms, but then came Tiananmen Square in 1989.
A major crackdown. It showed the party's limits on political dissent, even as economic reforms were set to continue and even accelerate afterwards.
The book also mentions the rise of Han nationalism during this later period.
Yes, becoming a more potent force in politics and society.
And the narrative basically concludes with Xi Jinping consolidating power, removing term limits in 2018.
Right, signaling a potential shift away from the Deng-era model of collective leadership.
So, looking at China now, based on the book's perspective, enormous economic change, but also continuities.
Definitely. Massive growth, huge infrastructure projects like the Three Gorges Dam, but also ongoing challenges, energy, environment, the Taiwan issue, and you still see echoes of the past.
Like Confucian values still having influence. Or managing foreign interaction, the SEZs, the Great Firewall, as a kind of modern barbarian management.
You could argue that, yeah. Adapting old patterns to new circumstances.
Yeah.
Internal migration is huge too, but constrained by that hukou registration system, creating inequalities.
And that fundamental question, what gives the CCP legitimacy now? How does the mandate of heaven translate in the 21st century? Is it economic performance, nationalism, stability?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? The basis of legitimacy seems to be shifting, evolving. The book leaves you thinking about those unresolved issues. Taiwan, human rights, the environment, the sheer complexity of modern China.
So wrapping it up, this deep dive really underscores those key themes. The shadow of warfare, the echoes of historical cycles, that constant push and pull between tradition and modernity, dealing with the outside world, and this enduring quest for national strength, for legitimacy.
And the book doesn't shy away from the immense human cost involved in this history, calling it a holocaust of violent ends at times. For you, the listener, understanding these deep historical roots is, well, pretty crucial for making sense of China's role in the world today.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought to leave you with. Considering all the incredible changes, economic, social, political, and China's complex relationship with its own past and the wider world, what might the defining features of China's next historical phase look like? And perhaps what new version of the Mandate of Heaven might be taking shape right now?
Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.